And the other way that it differentiates from the Double Dragon series is in the size of the sprites. What's this? Excuse me for 1 second. What's this all about? Oh. Apparently I'm not allowed to talk about it. Oh. Hello everyone, welcome to the re-review, the series where I get to replay and reassess games from my favourite gaming era. I'm Brian, also known as UK Gen Zoidberg, and back in 1991 I was a member of the writing team for Games X, which was the UK's first and only weekly games magazine. We would review games across all the major formats of the day, although my favourite was always the Commodore Amiga, and it remains possibly my favourite gaming machine of all time to this day. In this series I'm going to be revisiting all of the games that I reviewed and seeing whether or not my opinion still stands all these years later. For this latest episode, the game that I'm going to be taking a fresh look at is the Amiga version of Capcom's Final Fight, which was converted by Creative Materials and published by US Gold in 1991. The history of the beat-em-up genre can be traced all the way back to 1984, and the release of two incredibly influential games. Firstly, IRM's Kung Fu Master threw away the basics of one-on-one combat and instead saw multiple enemies attacking the player at once. Then there was Jordan Mechner's Karateka, which featured fantastic rotoscoped animation and a compelling plot. In both of these games though, the action took place in 2D, with the player only able to move left and right. It was the release of Neketsu Koha Kunio-kun in 1986 that finally saw the player able to move freely about the play area. You may know this game by its more popular Western name, Renegade, particularly if you played the fantastic Spectrum conversion by Ocean Software. Final Fight began life as a sequel to 1987's Street Fighter, and had the working title of Street Fighter 89. Thanks to the success of Double Dragon though, Capcom took the project in a different direction entirely, and changed the name accordingly. The project to make a sequel to Street Fighter was started again from scratch, and we all know how well that one turned out. Set on the streets of the fictional Metro City, Final Fight told the story of how the recently elected mayor, Mike Hagar, battled to keep the city safe for its citizens. Players could take control of either the ex-wrestler Hagar himself, or best friends Cody and Guy. Two players could team up as any combination of the three, and fight against the Mad Gear gang, and hopefully rescue Hagar's daughter Jessica. In a neat touch, all of the enemies that you encountered along the way were named after 1980s rock stars, such as Axl Rose, Billy Idol and Gene Simmons. Like many Capcom titles before it, the rights to publish home computer versions were picked up by US Gold, with conversion duties being handled by Creative Materials, a developer based in Manchester. To Amiga owners, they were known at the time for having produced the conversions of eSWAT and Line of Fire, as well as the game based on the movie Days of Thunder. In their previous guise as Binary Design, however, they had handled the Amiga versions of Shinobi and the first two Double Dragon games. Development took about 18 months, and required the artists to recolour the majority of the game's graphics by hand, which were ripped directly from the arcade board. In the arcade original, each of the game's characters had their own 16 colour palette, but seeing as the Amiga could only display 32 colours on screen at a time, I would imagine that this was a very painstaking and long-winded process, especially when you consider that they were making the Atari ST and all the 8-bit versions at the same time. Following on from their work on Final Fight, the team would go on to make the Amiga version of Street Fighter II the following year, as well as the incredibly divisive game based on The Godfather. Their final game before the team went their separate ways was the game's España 92 for Ocean Software, released alongside the Barcelona Olympics. Now it's time to check out my original review and see what I thought of Final Fight the first time I played it. My review appeared in issue 18 of Games X from August 1991. The cover game, and game of the week, was The Last Ninja 3 from System 3. Other Amiga games reviewed in the issue were Millennium's Robin Hood and Ocean's game based on the movie Darkman. I remember being blown away by the presentation in Final Fight, not only the excellent graphics, which remained smooth at all times no matter how many enemies were on screen, but also the excellent title music, which I claimed was better than the arcade original. I also pointed out that the Amiga version of Final Fight still featured a simultaneous 2-player mode if you had a friend that wanted to join you, unlike the version on the SNES. It all added up to one of the best beat 'em ups that I'd ever played. The final score was 5 X's out of 5. Both presentation and lastability earned 18 out of 20, with the gameplay earning 19 out of 20. Here's how my review score compared to those in other Amiga magazines around at the time. Don't believe anything else that you read about this game, for it is really one of the best so far this year. Even at full price, this game is a steal. Now let's see how the game plays today. It's time for the playtest. Okay, before we get started on this playtest, let's just take a moment out to praise the excellent music by Jolien Myers, which was an original composition for the Amiga version and didn't feature in the arcade original at all. It only plays on the title screen though. It sadly doesn't play during the game. There is no, like so many Amiga games, there is no music in the game itself. It'd be all too easy for me to sit here playing this and start saying things like, oh, well, there should have been crates there, or where did the barrels go that were on this level? Or, oh, enemies shouldn't appear from there. But I think to do that would actually diminish the achievements that Creative Materials actually have for getting this game to work on the Amiga at all. There are too many games reviews around where the game itself is slagged off because it doesn't meet the expectations of the reviewer, rather than reviewing what the game actually is. And this is not the arcade game. This is an interpretation of it for the Amiga. And I think to give the game its due, this actually does play and look reasonably good. It does a pretty decent job of converting the moveset from the arcade original onto a single button joystick. Like tapping the fire button while standing still will punch. If you push left or right at the same time, you'll instigate the flying kick. I think we should be thankful that the developers didn't include an option to have the space bar as a second button, because that just would have been impossible to implement. There's too many instances like that just happened there, where as the scene changes from one section to another, you'll find yourself being set upon by enemies before the screen's even faded into view. There's none of the little incidental animations that you would get to give you a little bit of respite in other versions. And it's also possible to get caught up by a number of enemies like that, to the point where you actually end up losing a life or almost half your health in one go. There you go, you see, I got hit before I even knew that there was somebody there, before I could even see anything. I mean, there are levels like this where the backgrounds do look a little bit naff, but on the whole, the graphics are a pretty good interpretation of what the original was. I mean, you will generally be concentrating your eye on the actual sprites, and those are excellent. Is it possible for me to get over that? Flying kick. There we go. Because of the way the enemies spawn in on this game, you do find yourself edging forward slightly and then walking back again just to make sure that they don't appear and hit you before you've got a chance to do anything. Death. Game over. There's also not a huge amount of variety to the actual move sets, apart from Hagar himself, who does have his wrestling moves.
In a direct comparison with the arcade original, this is always going to come across as the inferior version. But as a standalone fighting game on the Amiga, it's actually not bad. But I think that's enough for the playtest for today. Let's get on to the final summary.
Considering how poor many of the arcade beat-em-ups on the Amiga are, Final Fight is easily one of the most impressive. Also, when you look at the arcade conversions that Creative Materials were responsible for, this is easily the best one that they made, although that's admittedly a very low bar for them to get over. To praise them where they deserve it though, they've done a great job with the graphics more than anything. Yes, the backgrounds can be a little basic in places, but all of the key sections are here and instantly recognisable. It's the characters themselves that are the most impressive though. Even with the reduced colours they look excellent, and all of the animation is here. If the reduced number of characters per level was a concession that had to be made in order to retain the fidelity, I can live with it. Gameplay is the one area where the majority of Amiga brawlers come unstuck though, thanks to the limits of a single button joystick. The system that they've come up with here though is easily one of the best. The first thing that you see when the game loads up is a demonstration of what the controls are, and it works really well. It's not perfect though, far from it in fact. It's incredibly rough around the edges at times, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the game's structure itself. In the arcade original, you were able to take a few steps before the first wave of enemies appeared, whereas here you're thrown straight into the action at the end of every loading pause without warning. I found it almost impossible to avoid taking damage on far too many occasions. The Amiga scrolling beat-em-up Super League looks a bit like this, and as you can see, Final Fight ranks higher than any of the Double Dragon games, although still below the excellent version of Golden Axe. Don't forget that you'll be able to see me go through this entire list and explain my placements in a full Super League video next Friday. While I'd have to admit that my original 5-star review was a touch excessive, this is still probably the best version of the game that we could have asked for, and it remains playable today thanks to well thought out controls. If I was scoring it today, I'd probably give it 7 out of 10. Thank you for watching this episode of the re-review, I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do give us a like and subscribe. If this is your first episode of the re-review, or you just want to catch up on one of the old ones, we have a playlist of all previous episodes for you right here on the channel. There's going to be another episode coming up in 2 weeks' time, and if you want a clue as to what game I'm going to be playing, there's a little bit of music playing right now that will give you a hint. All opinions expressed in this video are entirely mine and not those of the UK Gaming Network team, so if you disagree with something that I've said about Final Fight, please tell me what you think of it in the comments. Don't forget you can follow me over on Twitter at UKJenZoidberg if you want to know what games I'm currently playing. Until next time, happy retro gaming, I'll see you soon.